Organic versus acquisition growth. Which is right for your company? Brought to you by CFO On Demand from Fitzpatrick, Bongiovanni, and Kelly CPAs. Please support our sponsors. At the end of the presentation, you will hear from Travelene Wealth Management Group of Wells Fargo. I will be your presenter. My name is Lou Bongiovanni, and I am the managing partner of CFO On Demand. And thanks for joining us. Here are our webinar objectives. We'll talk about what factors indicate your ideal growth method. We'll discuss the pros and cons of each growth method and 7 ways to determine the best growth method. Okay, so now you've determined that you want to grow your company, and more than just the 2 or 3% a year that just happens just in the normal course of business. You have a growth strategy that you want to achieve, and now you sit down and plan out exactly how you're going to grow. This is how the entrepreneur thinks. The normal business owner just says, hey, we'll do our best to grow, and whatever we grow, we did our best. This is not that. This is a planned growth strategy, and that's how most entrepreneurs are driven to success. So this is what we're going to be talking about. So the growth methods, the 2 growth methods that are considered are one, organic growth method, and the other one is acquisition growth method. Let me describe both of them here. One, the organic growth method is achieved by increasing output. You're producing more services or product here. You have an enhanced sales initiative to try to grow internal sales, and most likely you're adding employees or resources in order to achieve that. So that's all happened internally as you're trying to achieve a specific growth pattern or target. The other way is acquisition. A lot of people will call this M&A, merger and acquisition. I'm just going to call it acquisition. That's a targeted acquisition of another company or group of companies in order to grow your existing company. So that is the second method that is highly used in growing. So one's organic, the other one's acquisition. Now, there are a number of factors that need to be taken into consideration by owners to determine which one is best for them. Okay, and this is an important decision and one that requires a lot of pre-planning and communication. And once it's determined, then actions take place. So what we want to focus on in the next 4 slides are the things that the owners of the company that are looking to grow should take into consideration so that they can determine whether an organic or an acquisition growth method is best for them. So first thing to think about is time or timelines. What is the desired timeline? Are the owners in their 50s and want to retire in their early 60s, so they have a 10-year timeline that they're looking at? So they're looking to grow the company from where it is now to a set target number. Then if they sell at a multiple, let's say, of that target number's revenue or profits, that will satisfy their retirement plans, and therefore now they've established a timeline. Another thing to think about too is once you have a timeline, is it better to build or buy? You'll hear that terminology from time to time when you're thinking about growth strategies here. If you're building it, then it's organic. If you're buying it, then of course it's acquisition. Again, does that fit in your timeline? And as I alluded to here, what is your exit strategy? Because ultimately, many business owners are focused on the exit strategy to determine their timeline. And the exit strategy doesn't have to be retirement. It could be moving on to another venture. Available capital. In order to make that decision, you need to consider what monies do you have internally to invest in either growth method. Are you going to invest your resources in order to acquire a business? There'll also be financing needed. So how much would a lending institution, your existing bank, be willing to contribute? Or they're going to give you 70% of it, and then you'll have to come up with a 30%. Is that 30% funds that you have access to? If you do make that investment, how much is available for future growth in the short term? Those kind of issues need to be drawn out. That's where this particular factor, especially clients lean on CFO on demand and running those numbers to determine what that would look like as far as structuring a transaction. Another consideration if you're doing a merger or acquisition is, will the existing owners need to give up ownership? Are they acquiring a company or merging with a company, and then that company's owners become partners of the new company? That's another consideration that should be thought of before moving too far down the path. And then what down payment and ultimately what collateral? What of my existing assets am I willing to risk if things go very bad in doing this growth? A lot of times that'll make someone who's not really very entrepreneurial hold back and think twice and maybe not pull the trigger on this particular growth strategy. Now the target company. If there is a potential target company that you're considering, you need to analyze that as a viable option. Is there one out there that you desire? Is it available for sale? And if so, at what price? At what terms would it be? Is it going to be an acquisition, meaning I acquire that company goes away and only my company remains? Or is it going to be a merger, which means I acquire that company contributes its assets and ownerships, and now a new company emerges. So they say if I'm company A, that's company B, A plus B equals a C, or a different company altogether, as opposed to an acquisition is A, the acquiring, plus B, the target. What's done is you're just left with A, the acquiring company. So how would that be structured, and what issues would there be as far as ownership in the short term and possibly long term? An internal factor for sure that needs to be considered and is often overlooked, because once there is a potential target to consider, the numbers are really focused on the future growth as people get excited about. And the one thing that's not very sexy and not very easy to put your finger on is the culture. What impact's that going to have the culture of this new company once you bring in another company? Is the culture going to change? Invariably it will. In what ways is what gets a little fuzzy. That's a little hard to pin down, but owners try to do their best to do that. One other thing, so that's if you acquire, you're bringing a new culture overnight, and what impact would that have, favorably or unfavorably? And then second of all, if you're growing organically, how's that impact the culture? Are we growing our existing product line just bigger, or are we adding new product lines? Do we need to set up separate groups or separate teams in order to achieve that? All those things come into consideration when you're entertaining either growth strategy. Ownership standards. This one is also a difficult hurdle to get over, because if you have a business owner, and it doesn't matter if it's a service or a product, they tried very hard to maintain a certain high standard, you presume. In looking at a potential acquisition, one thing that they need to feel comfortable with are the standards that they've achieved with their existing company maintained by this company that they're entertaining to acquire. If that's the case, then that hurdle's overcome. If there's uncertainty about that, maybe that company's reputation is not as stellar as the acquiring company, those type of things need to be taken into consideration. And that sometimes creates some friction, because that impacts culture for sure. So the standard of service or product needs to be considered in either one. And if you're looking to grow, you want to make sure that if we grow, are we going to be sacrificing some standard of service? If we grow too fast, are we able to service our clients in the same way? Risk aversion. Risk is usually the big factor that separates the true entrepreneurs from the ones that want to be entrepreneurs, right? It's your aversion to risk here. Are you willing to risk capital? And in an acquisition, that's a lot of capital in a one-time investment. Or are you willing to risk capital over an extended period of time if you're looking to grow organically? you want to assess what that risk is. And again, you want to try to, you hope for the best, but you prepare for the worst type thing. So you want to say, okay, if I'm risking my capital, my assets that I've earned here, and I'm gambling them, what's the worst that could happen if things go bad? Do I have a shortfall to kind of cut off the losses? So they're the factors that the owners need to think about and discuss when determining a growth versus organic method. In doing that, they should consider the pros and cons of each method, and that's what I'll go over next. So first, the organic method. Right, the pros to that is it's invaluable knowledge gained right in the process of growing, whether you're growing a different division or you're expanding your existing one. There's a lot of internal R&D here. You're developing the company internally here. It's not as costly many times, and it is all yours, customized. Less culture issues with integration. Again, as far as if you're acquiring another company, you have a new culture thrusted upon you immediately overnight many times. That's not the case here. It's more of a gradual thing. The pride, the feeling that, hey, I did it or we did it as a team, is again something that is a pro of our organic growth. And sustainable growth is a pro as well, or could be. Once you get to that mindset, a growth mindset, and it's a constant one, that is something that is more sustainable many times than you acquire someone and then you kind of scramble to integrate them. Right? The cons to organic growth. The time involved. Many times organic growth, almost every time, organic growth takes longer than an acquisition. If you have an acquisition, you're buying their book of business immediately. Obviously, you can't grow a company that fast. So time is a big con to this. Behind the competition flood the market. So another con to our organic growth is that if you're taking a long time to grow, are you falling behind? In this age of technology, growth tends to happen rapidly. So if you're kind of slow and steady growing, are you always behind the curve and other entrants are coming in and leapfrogging you because they grew by acquisition, let's say. And that ties into the next one, that's stunted growth. And strain on the business, the current business. A sustained growth mindset is wonderful to achieve, but it's very hard to do that. It's almost liking it to working out, and you're always pushing yourself constantly, and rarely come up for air. It can be perceived as a grind depending on how the business owner and the managers approach it. So that is a constant ongoing focus and sometimes can be draining depending on an owner's management style. So that may or may not fit an owner's management style either. Let's turn to acquisition growth. The pros to it, kind of the flip side is what I was saying with the cons. One, it's just faster, easier, I'll question, but easier to do in the fact that once the transaction is done, the new business is incorporated in. It lessens competition. Obviously, if you're merging or acquiring a competitor, you've already eliminated some of your competition. There's turnkey talent in the workplace, so whatever they have and they've grown, you get the benefit of. You get the benefit of all their corrected mistakes and their expertise, and you hit the ground running. And really, you would only do this if you felt that the purchase price of the company you're acquiring is low and you see a growth potential, right? You're not looking to buy high and then hope somewhere down the line you can grow this company further. You're looking to get the company at a discount so there's value built in there, and then you can add what you bring to the table through your existing company, and that synergism and complementing whether it's your product or service or your internal staff will bring a higher value. So 1 + 1 = 3 as opposed to 2 in that mindset. That's really something that you're looking to achieve in an acquisition. The cons is the cost and strain on the finances immediately, right? You're getting back into, you're increasing your debt, probably by a substantial amount overnight, and there's uncertainty as far as your return on your investment. I mean, you have your plans of moving forward, but that's where the risk lies with making a big investment here. There's an impact to culture changes. New partners or owners may come into play, so there's a cultural change potentially all the way from the top guy to the lowest level person. You have to work through those invariably. Some are easier than others. The feeling that this is not your business anymore, depending on how much you're giving up, could be a concern. And then if there's problems with that every company there are problems, how big are those problems, and will those problems escalate under this new acquisition environment? Sometimes that's very, very hard to predict. Okay, so they are the pros and cons of a growth versus acquisition model. Next, I'd like to talk about the 7 ways to determine the best growth method for you and your company. So we kind of talked about the factors to consider. We talked about the pros and cons of this factor. Now, these 7 steps are what I'm recommending that you really focus on if you're committed to a growth method over a certain particular timeline. So the first thing is timeline. Determine what your time horizons are. If you're a student of Stephen Covey, he always would preach about starting with the end in mind. So timelines are just that. What's my exit strategy? What's the end in mind here? How long do I have to grow? And that might cancel out one growth method altogether because one clearly happens quicker than the other. Your industry will also dictate timelines as well, especially if it's a high-changing industry. You might want to factor in how long it'll take you to get up to date with current technologies, for example, as opposed to just buying it. You want to meet with the existing owners, assuming you're not the only owner and the existing owners are there. They may have different timelines. This whole acquisition may accelerate their exit timelines. It might expand it. Talks of bringing a next generation in, that may have been the impetus of growing the company because you want to grow it and pass it on to a next generation. All those factors come into line. And if there's more than one owner, or frankly, even if there's one owner, but you have a very active spouse, so I would consider that 2 owners, even though there might only be one formal owner, you want to get all issues that may be a factor in this out on the table and discuss them before you go outwardly committing yourself to a certain growth timeline. Finances obviously comes back to that, and this is the areas I mentioned before, cannot be ignored early on in the process. You don't want to go around shopping for a business or coming up with a growth strategy only to find you can't afford what you've been shopping for. That's embarrassing. That's potentially problematic in showing your hand to potential acquiring companies. So you want to make sure you have a very healthy conversation or number of conversations with your bank. Again, our role as CFO on Demand, this is an area we spend quite a bit of time on, working with the banks and financing and trying to structure deals such as this. That's time well spent in preparing projections, which the banks invariably will want. I mean, you need to sell your bank that this is a good idea, and that the bank plays a very critical role, in my opinion, as an outside impartial person who's presumably seen a lot of transactions such as this. They don't have the emotional attachment that a company looking to grow will have, and they can really ground or challenge a particular growth plan. So I've seen banks blow up deals for good reason, and I've seen them finance deals for good reason. Step number 4, you want to review the financial impact. I've kind of alluded to this already, and again, this is a space we spend a lot of time on as outsourced CFOs, is how will the growth impact cash flow? The premise is, well, it'll have a positive financial impact, or else why would we even consider it? And that's true, and that is the premise. But sometimes, and this is the hard part, no matter if you're AT&T emerging or if you're a mom and pop small business, the timeline to achieve that positive impact to cash flow is extremely hard to predict. And because of that, you want to make sure that you're as conservative as you can be, and then again, being pleasantly surprised is great. So how will the growth impact cash flow? And long-term, probably good, but how about in the short term? What is the downside if the method falls short? Again, do you have some safeguards here? If you've acquired a business, let's say, and a key employee passes away suddenly, or there's theft, or there's something goes wrong with the product or service there, what safeguards do you have to at least preserve the structure you had before and mitigate your losses? We talked about how it would impact your current cash flow, how it would impact your current profits. Clearly, your current profits will impact future borrowing power or bonding if you're into construction. It'll also impact your income taxes. So there's a lot of impact to profits that should be considered. And then the down pay, how long will it take to pay down the debt? So you've bought this new business, you've incurred more debt than you've had before. Many business owners are debt averse, so they want to know how quickly can I pay this down? And those things need to be discussed, especially if you have different owners in different stages of their ownership. They're going to have different opinions about it, and trying to find something that pleases everybody can be challenging. You want to get your internal house in order before you go too far down the pike with that. Number 5, what is the growth goal? All right. Do you want to gain market share there? What's the benefit of gaining market share? Is there a synergism that makes us stronger combined because we're acquiring a new line so we can go up against bigger competitors? Right now we might be competing against each other, but you do a merger, now we can go after bigger competitors and go after bigger jobs. Okay, that makes sense to me. And then what's the future? What's the future growth plan? Again, especially if you're an acquirer, or even if you're organic, but especially if you're an acquirer, what's the future growth plan? What justifies me getting my return on this investment, right? You bought it for a certain price. You need to increase the value of it to make this even worthwhile from a value standpoint, but it also has to make sense from an income standpoint as well. There's 2 different hurdles you have to achieve, and the 2 don't always work in sync. I will tell you they often do not work in sync, and therefore you need to be prepared to address both of them. Number 6, we alluded to this before, again, hard to quantify. It's not in my left brain here. It's more right brain thinking, so it's hard to measure the impact of culture, but the structure can be measured and planned out. So will this spread management too thin, your existing management? Should this be a new division or a new business? How do we deal with ownership? How do we incentivize management in that particular new company or new division? All those issues should be addressed, and they're all important issues, but ones that rarely get thought of in the beginning stages. And I'm not saying you have to have immediate answers for all of this, but at least if you have a general game plan and get buy-in from this management, that's important, because you don't want them to jump ship there, especially if they're part of a long-term plan. But if in the short term they're not feeling welcomed or they're even feeling threatened, you might jeopardize that shot to really get them motivated on board. So the impact to the culture from the line staff or the management and non-management is critical, as well as ownership is extremely important. And lastly, number 7, what is my exit strategy? I kind of alluded to Stephen Covey and going forward and starting with the end in mind. Are you looking to add value? Are you looking to cash out at one time, or are you looking to pass it to a next generation? All those things need to be considered and will be discussed, I believe, when you're doing budgets and projections for this, and that's invariably part of the financing. So banks should ask you this, your internal CFO should ask you this, you should ask it of yourself, your fellow owner should ask this. This question should be asked by multiple people multiple times along the way to make sure the answer doesn't change, and if it does change, everyone's on board with the changed game plan. So there's 7 ways to determine the best growth method for you. Let me do a quick recap here. So number 1, Set up your timelines. What is a timeline that will have an impact as far as what methods you want? Longer timeline, organic comes into play. Shorter timeline, it favors acquisition. Meet with your existing owners. Make sure you have all ownership on the same page, including spouses if there are key factors in the decision. That can be a big hurdle at times, maybe not at other times, especially if there's a disparity in income levels of the owners or wealth levels of the owners and age. Will the bank finance it? How much does the bank have an appetite for this transaction? That should also be a telltale sign of whether or not this is a good deal for you. If you think you have a sweetheart deal and the bank doesn't want to touch it, you need to have a check there as to why that is, and maybe look at it with a new pair of eyes. Review financial impact. This is doing your internal homework. Again, this is a space we spend a lot of time on as far as doing projections and estimations of where you think this is going to, the benefits of your growth strategy. Establish goals. What are you looking to do? Are you looking to have double-digit growth for a period of time because you see an external opportunity in the market, maybe because a competitor is falling off or because there is a particular demand for your product? All those things should be articulated, and you have to get super formal with it, but if you get it on paper or a couple of bullet points at least, it helps when you have to tell the story over and over again that the narrative is consistent. You want to review the culture and structural impact here. You want to structure the deal initially in a certain way that is win-win for ownership as well as management, and you want to be able to predict the cultural impact to it. If there's going to be conflicts in the culture, how do you plan on resolving it? If you have an existing manager with this one thought process, new one coming in with the other one, which one's going to win? Or is there a third one that's going to be a compromise? Those kind of things, if you can play that out, that can eliminate a lot of drama. And last, what is my exit strategy? What's the end goal? Why do I want to grow? You know, and again, you probably should ask that in the beginning, but you definitely should ask it at the end. Why do I want to grow? Am I doing it to feed my ego? Am I doing it for profitability? Am I doing it for a better quality of life? Will it achieve a better quality of life? All those are tough questions that we are very instrumental in answering for clients and asking them. And again, this is the diagram that we subscribe to CFO on Demand. The blue line is what we conventionally see with clients. They work very hard with their internal accounting staff to get financial reporting. But the financial analysis, which is very critical in determining your growth method, usually falls short. And it's one thing if you're planning on growing 1 or 2 or 5% a year, but if you're planning on growing quite a bit, that analysis is very critical because you're going to be leaning on it for rather important decisions. And that's where CFO on Demand reinforces that for a business owner and helps the business owner not just be an operator who is putting out fires some of the time and trying to grow the company and has a lot of balls in the air and maybe sacrifices their quality of life, to a business strategist who seems like they just have their act together. They're out enjoying themselves with their family. The company's growing. They seem to slow things down and make critical decisions. You see this constantly on Shark Tank. If you're a Shark Tank fan, I mean, there are clearly the sharks. There are clearly business strategists of the highest degree. Many of them are billionaires. That's just great. You see it on TV all the time. It's great to see that. I like The Prophet as well. He's a business strategist. So there's great examples of this on primetime TV. So it's really important to determine where you stand with that and what you want to aspire to. But the one thing that's important and where we find our place is as CFO on Demand and really supporting that business owner to financial success. Our future presentations. We have 3 left here for this year. We have in October, November, and December, Maximizing Profits, the annual Strategic and Planning Budget webinar, and finally talking about cybersecurity. Unfortunately, there's more and more of that in the news, so we want to address that with you. I am going to now go to our sponsors, and we hear a word from the Travelene Wealth Management Group.
The Traveline Wealth Management Group of Wells Fargo Advisors is a proud sponsor of the 2019 CFO On Demand webinar series. The Traveline Wealth Management Group offers our clients a full range of financial products and services. We are dedicated to helping our clients meet their financial goals utilizing our customized investment process. Our process, which was born of experience, has helped generations of investors develop strategies to meet their financial goals while always considering an individual's risk profile. The goal of the process is to evaluate if and how a client can meet their life goals via proper management of their financial assets. I, Joseph Traveline, am a certified financial planner and the leader of the Traveline Wealth Management Group. I bring to our clients my 23 years of experience and vast knowledge in the areas of estate planning, investment products, retirement planning, and portfolio management. Please review this slide for a list of products and services offered by the Traveline Wealth Management Group. If you're interested in talking to me or a team member to learn more about the investment process, please contact us 609-926-7822, or we can be reached via an email at travelingwealthmanagementgroup@wellsfargoadvisors.com or by visiting our website. Thank you.